Good afternoon. My name is Elisa Maish, and I'm an interviewer affiliated with the American Red Cross in Tucson, Arizona, a Veterans History Project contributor. The veteran I am interviewing today, Friday, February 13, 2015, is Odra Bradley, who prefers to go by the name Brad. Brad currently lives in Tucson, Arizona. He was born in Macon, Missouri on August 19, 1920, and is currently 94 years old, or 94 years young, and as he likes to say, 94 years and 6 months. Brad enlisted into the United States Army on July 10, 1942, and left service on November 11, 1945. Brad's service to his country occurred during the Second World War. Thank you, Brad. Let's get started. Remember, this is your story. For the record, please state your full name and date of birth.
My name is Odra W. Bradley. I was born in Macon, Missouri, August the 19th, 1920.
Brad, tell us about Macon, Missouri, and about your parents and your home life.
Macon, Missouri was a small town in Missouri. I think the population when I was a kid was maybe 1,500 or 2,000, something like that for our town. And I liked small towns because everybody knew everybody in the town, and it was like a whole village, and anybody in the village was responsible to see that everybody in the village functioned properly, which meant that you couldn't get away with doing naughty things because anyone would stop you and correct you, and I liked that. And then we got to know almost all of the people. I knew where they lived, what they did, and that kind of thing. So I really wanted to continue to live in a small town as an adult, but then I realized that things change when you become an adult depending on what kind of work you're going to do, and the town maybe or doesn't have those opportunities.
So tell us about your parents and your family.
My parents, the generation before them, were full-time farmers. My mom and dad had decided that they were not going to continue farming, but the reason they came to Macon, Missouri was that they lived in Howard County, which was 3 or 4 counties south and west of us, and there was not flood control, and the rivers overflowed and would destroy the crops maybe once every 2 or 3 years. So many of the people who were farmers there came out of that county and came to Macon County, which was higher ground, and they began farming up there. That's how they got to Macon, Missouri.
And what was your father's name?
My dad's name was Alec Bradley, and he gave himself a middle name of Andrew, so he went by Alec A. Bradley. My mom's name was Addie Gertrude Elizabeth Carter, and then she married Pop and became a Bradley.
So did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had 9 siblings. There were 10 of us in our family. And large families were that kind of unusual in our day and age, but they had been that way during the rural agrarian economy. It made the workers available to help do the crops and do the farming. But in a town where you didn't do farming, then that was just a large family, and it was kind of a little unusual.
So did any of your brothers and sisters enter the military?
Yes, I had 3 brothers who were in the military during the time that I was in the military. I served with one brother for better than 2 years in the United States in Camp Carson, Colorado. And then they split us up before we went abroad, and I got to see him once or twice afterwards in Europe.
Okay. And Brad, what did you actually do in Macon? Were you in Macon before entering the service?
Yes. We had, Macon was a small town, and of course things were completely segregated in those days, and it didn't bother me. I didn't understand what that meant anyway until I was maybe halfway becoming an adult. And I figured out when we went to separate schools that was different, and so we lost all of our friends that we knew that way. And when we finished ninth grade in our town, they had only 10th grade for blacks in our town. And you went to 10th grade, then you get out of town, get a job, go away or whatever. Pop sued the school board, but that was legal for them to do that. But Mom and Pop insisted that we had to get a high school diploma, because they said one day you might have to want to go to college, and you can't get in college without a high school diploma. We didn't know anybody that ever went to college anyway, and so we thought that was kind of ridiculous. But they insisted. They transported us to a town 25 miles away, and 5 of us had to do that in order to get high school diplomas. But they insisted on that, and they, I think they were right in the sense that one day that did happen.
So they sounded very influential in your life.
They were. Mom and Pop were, they were a very unusual couple. Number one, I never saw them have an argument. Never saw them once in my life have an argument. So if they had decisions that they disagreed on, they evidently took care of it without our being privy to that. And I thought that was unique. And the other thing was that if one parent said yes, the other parent would going to say yes, and if one parent said no, the other parent was going to say no. So you couldn't go split it off and I'll go ask Mom and then I'll ask Pop. You couldn't do that. And they were very, very conscious of our well-being. They provided for us to have food, clothing, and shelter, and they were very strict on our getting our lessons in school. You had to do your lessons. They sat with us after dinner every evening to be sure that we finished all of our homework that we were assigned to for school, and they were very careful about that. And if you got in trouble at school, you were in trouble at home, and so we knew that. They were very supportive of education.
So what opportunities were available to you in Macon?
Well, as I became a young adult, I became very angry and very disappointed to learn that just because you were black, you were segregated against, and you could not have the opportunities that other people did. And that was a problem for me for about 3 years. If you were black in my town, you could be a bellhop at a hotel, you could be a bellboy, you could be a chauffeur, you could be a yard man, or you could do these menial kinds of jobs. And they paid $5 or $6 a week, and if you worked, you got paid. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. There was no benefits, no sick leave, nothing provided. And that was very, well, it was kind of stymieing for me to think that that's the way we were going to have to live the rest of our lives. That's when I realized that when I did become an adult, I had to find a way to get out of that. And so one of the things that happened was when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, we saw that as an opportunity to go to the military. And we believed, and Mom and Pop believed, that if you were a part of a country, you became a part of the country's defense. Even though the country had problems, it was your country, but you had to support your country. And so they told us if we wanted to go to the military, that was fine, because everybody should support their country. And so 4 of us did join the military. Isaiah, my brother, who was older than me, next older, he and I talked about it. He was making $7 a week, and I was making $5 a week. And out of that $5 or $7, we had to contribute something to the household because we were still at home and we were teenagers. And then we didn't have any way to get health care if you got sick or you needed dental care or whatever. You had no provision for that. So he decided that if we went to the Army, they had a provision then to paying $21 a month if you went to Army or to military. But they also gave you food, clothing, shelter, and health care, all of that wrapped up, plus $21 a month. And I was making $20 a month as it was, and paying for, if I got any of the other benefits, I had to pay for them. So we figured that was the most economical thing we could do at that time. And besides, we wanted to serve our country. So we volunteered and went to service.
And why did you pick the U.S. Army?
Well, I think there were very limited opportunities. In my town, the Army was probably the only avenue into the military. I think it was, because we went to the draft board, and then we talked to the people, and they said, okay, you can join the Army. And so we joined the Army. We didn't matter to us. We were not swimmers, and so I didn't want to be in the Navy, and that was the only choices that I knew you had. I really wanted to be in the Air Force. And when I was 18, I went to St. Louis and took the exam to join the Air Force, but they were not taking blacks into the Air Force no matter how you scored on the exam, and so that was out. And so the military, the Army, was okay with us.
Okay. So where did you actually go to training?
We were shipped from Macon, Missouri to Jefferson Barracks, which is just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. And we were inducted at Jefferson Barracks. After we finished the induction part of it, then they gave us all the testing that they do, and then they assigned us to Camp Carson, Colorado. And they chose a contingency of young blacks to form the non-commissioned officers corps to support the companies. And I was chosen as one of those, and Izir was too. And so we went in with the understanding that if we progressed like we should, we would become non-commissioned officers, and so we did that.
Okay. What was camp like?
Camp life was, at first it was very different because we had not been able to socialize with, well, I don't know how to quite say it. Mom and Pop were very careful about the people with whom we associated. And if there were people who broke the law or did things that they shouldn't, like were not good workers, or they stole things, or they did things that they shouldn't do, we were not allowed to associate with those people. In the Army, they had all of those and more, and so you had to learn how to get along with all of those people. That was the first shock for me. And the other thing was, there were kids from the large cities that seemed to know how to beat the rap of anything, and to say yes sir to the officers, and then they do something entirely different and get away with it. And I didn't know how to do that. So we had to learn how to get along with all of those people. That was one of the greatest things I had to learn. And Izir was skilled at that, and he learned how to do that way before I did, and I was kind of slow in that area.
So what was barracks life like?
Barracks life was great. We had nice barracks. I think there were 2-story barracks buildings most of the time. And you had bunks, and you had sections of the bunks that were assigned to you as an individual. You had indoor plumbing, and that was unusual because we didn't have indoor plumbing at home. And there were a lot of the benefits that the Army life gave us. They were very strict in their training, and but that wasn't a problem because we were always taught to do what you're supposed to do anyway, so that wasn't hard for us. But then the social life, we had the chance to, when we were off duty, to go into the city of the town where the camp was located. We could go into that city, and you could mingle with the people in the city, and we got acquainted with lots of people in the city. And they let us take one of the buildings and make a non-commissioned officers club out of it for the non-commissioned officers when we became non-coms. And there we had our parties and our dances. We had slot machines, we had card games, and we had a lot of fun things. We could go to the PX and you could buy beer, and then you could go to town and buy alcohol. And there were a lot of fun things to do. And we knew that you could be off duty and you could do things like that, but the big thing was, when it was time for you to be back on duty, you had to be sober and back on duty. And if you didn't do that, you were in trouble. You went to the guardhouse. So we tried to avoid the guardhouse.
So I'm sure that you remember fondly many friends. Okay, maybe tell us about your friends.
I met some of the most unusual people. I met some bad guys, and I learned how to get along with them. Izir taught me how to do that. And then I met a lot of good guys. There were kids in there, maybe within a year or two of my age, most of them were. And there were kids from large cities and small cities, but there were kids who had gone to college, like Prue Sloan had gone to college for a year or so. Lum Davis had gone to college for a year or so, and they were interested in reading and studying poetry and literature and going to the library, and they took me into their group. And I loved that because it gave me a chance to see what it would be like if you had a chance to go to college and get a higher education.
So after your training, Where did you go next?
Well, we were assigned to stay in Camp Carson for the duration of the war. But the war became very, very broad spread. The Germans had taken North Africa, and then they went into Europe and took almost all of Europe, and then they were threatening to take England, and then they attacked Russia. And so when it became so widespread, they changed the rule and said, instead of staying here for the duration, we need to ship you overseas to help us with the war overseas. So we did 2 years in the States, but after this, then they sent us to Fort Francis E. Warren in Wyoming and transferred us from this company to a salvage collection company to go overseas. And so we went from there to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, from there to England, and then we entered went across the Channel and entered Europe through Le Havre in France.
So what duties did you actually have?
Well, our main duty was, as salvage collectors, was to take care of all of the military equipment after the war had gone through an area. Then there would be abandoned vehicles that were damaged, or vehicles that were not damaged that were captured from the enemy. And our job was to collect all of these vehicles of every kind and get them into a place where they could be reassigned to other units, or sold, or given to the countries that needed the military equipment. And our job is to take care of that. And our job also was to take supplies or munitions up to the front lines. We were behind the artillery, to take supplies up towards the front line and keep it supplied for the people who were fighting, the troops that were fighting.
Okay. And did you ever see any combat?
No, we didn't see any combat at all. We were a Quartermaster Corps is a service unit, but we did have 2 or 3 opportunities to come in contact with German prisoners. Once we had more than we had only one section of our company that I was with continuously when we were in Europe, maybe 20 or 30 men, 2 or 3 not platoons, a couple of platoons, but we were always less than a company, and we had 1 or 2 officers with us, and we at one time had like 150 POWs surrendered themselves to us. And I have the pictures in that magazine with them. We just put up a tape around a circle around them and put a tape on them, and then put up a machine gun on 2 sides of it. And when they surrendered, they were through. They didn't want to fight anymore. They knew the war was going to be over. They knew where they were losing. And all they wanted was time to rest and relax until they got out of the army. So we had, I remember, more than 100 prisoners once or twice.
So what was it like being a black in the military? I think you had mentioned before the interview that you weren't allowed to carry weapons.
Well, yes, we were given weapons and trained to use weapons before we went overseas. And that's happened when we went to Fort Francis E. Warren. And we carried the weapons with us. We had to when we were in the field because martial law was in effect. And when you went into the town, you were behind the military. The fighting troops had already gone through. But you go into a town, you declared martial law because you couldn't cohabitate, and you had to have your weapons. And you had to have your weapons because if something happened and you were attacked by a fragment of a unit, you had to be able to do that. But so that was true, but they had assigned blacks as service units for the most part in World War II because they were not sure of where blacks would stand if there were a choice for them to turn the weapons on the people who had been their oppressors. And I think that was a part of it, and we understood that. But Mom and Pop had taught us that that's not your decision. The way to do this is you have to find a way to work within the structure and not against the structure. And if you work within the structure, you can help change the structure. And so that was our whole feeling towards us. And besides that, we found in Europe that people treated us just like any other unit of soldiers. They didn't treat us as black soldiers. They were all black, and we had all white officers. But the people in Europe accepted us and treated us with the greatest of respect, just like they would anybody else. And this was very comforting to us because it taught us that all people didn't judge you on the basis of your color, and that was a great experience for us.
Okay. So do you remember any of your friends or fellow soldiers from the European theater?
Yes, the group that I was able to run with before we went overseas was Prue Sloan from New Orleans. He'd been to college for a year and a half or so. Lum Davis had been a ghostwriter for professional writers in New York. Wayne Davis was from Joplin, Missouri, which was my home state, and they'd all had either some college or aspirations for going to college, and I had a chance to run with them. So it gave me a feeling that that was going to be important. We had an information officer, information officer who told us that Congress had proposed a bill that if it passed, it would make it possible for veterans who came back from service to be able to go to college under what they called the GI Bill of Rights. And when we were in Germany, way up in the middle of Germany in the summertime of '45, and that bill passed, and the information officers called us all together, that group of 6 or 8 of us, and had us all sign a piece of paper saying if the GI Bill passes that we would all go back and go to college and move ourselves up from the bottom of the pole somewhere into the middle class. And that was one of the greatest advantages that the World War II did. It made a tremendous impact on the middle class because there were veterans who were able to get back into college.
Okay. While you were in Europe, did you have an opportunity to meet the Europeans or to socialize, and what were your impressions generally as you traveled through these countries?
I met people who were just people trying to get along. The heartbreaking part about it was the German people who were left in the towns in Germany. After we got out of France, France had suffered tremendously. But once we liberated France, we got into Germany, we found out that the enemy really was not the population that was left in the area. They were the ones that were the victims of the Hitler military conquest. There were nothing but women, old women, young women, and little children. I saw one adult man once or twice in Germany, and that's about all. In France, I saw others. I saw others in Belgium and Luxembourg, and I have pictures of them. They were accepting of us as liberators. We were just troops to them. And this made a tremendous impression upon me. I saw on Easter Sunday morning, we built a bridge across the Rhine River. We pulled these troops up, and so you got 2 days, 24 hours or 48 hours to put a bridge across this river, and so we can go across with our troops and tanks. And they did that. It was just wonderful. I have a picture of the Rhine River being crossed on Sunday morning. Also on the same Sunday morning, I saw thousands of German people, mostly women and children, going to church. And I thought Hitler had wiped that completely out, but he hadn't. They were there, and they were just great to us. I had 2 or 3, I met 1 or 2 young German girls. I have pictures of them. I met a group of 3 or 4 little German kids that were 5, 6, and 7, and they taught me a song that I had remembered for years, and it finally went in German, and I finally went away. I kept a lot of the German, but not that. I couldn't remember that. But it gave me the feeling that people all over the world are just people. They are trying to get along. They want to do the right thing. And if they were given the chance, I know that those people in Germany would not have permitted that to happen to their country, but they didn't have the chance.
Right. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you if you remembered any of the song.
I did for years, I did. I kept a lot of the German. Ich konnte kleine Deutsch sprechen. Heute ist Freitag. And, you know, I remember a whole lot of it. I kept that. But I couldn't remember this song again. It just went away, gradually went away. I had it for a long time, but it went away.
What were your greatest impressions of being in Europe?
Well, one of the greatest impressions was we were in the field most of the time. You slept in the field, you dug a foxhole at night, and you got down underneath the surface of the ground if you could. You didn't get to shave or brush your teeth or comb your hair for 2 and 3 and 4 days at a time. If you did, you got a chance to heat some hot water in a helmet and shave. That was a rarity. And it was pretty rugged. There was always food. We had shelter when we'd come to a town. We went into town. We had military law. We would clear the houses out. That was tough. People had to leave the house for us to be able to take the house, and we did that. And I felt bad about that, but it was just one of those things. I remember one time in a house in Germany, we went to bed one night. There were about 16 or 20 of us in our unit. And we woke up in the morning. There were more German troops in the house than there were of us, and they had laid their weapons down. Ours were laying down. We got up in the morning. They looked at us, and we looked at them. They took their weapons and went out one door, and we went out the other and just kept going. It was that kind of feeling that we knew that the war was over. They knew when it was over. One day at about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, the sun was still up. We watched the American bombers come over, and there were so many of them for almost 30 to 45 minutes. The sky was covered with bombers and fighter planes going across into further into Germany. And we knew then that no country in the world could withstand that kind of power. And we knew it, and the Germans knew it. That was when we took prisoners. And that was when prisoners were sleeping with us. All of us knew that the war had been lost. They had lost the war. And it was a terrible feeling in a way, but I was glad because we met many German and French people that had suffered so much. They'd stayed in the underground. They'd provided contacts for American troops. They'd done so many things. And in France, they celebrate D-Day every year. Every year. They never quit celebrating D-Day, victory in Europe. And they gave me a medal, just as though I had been there to do that. And here I was, after all of these years, went back as a civilian, and they gave me a medal and said, "Thank you. If it weren't for you, we'd still be speaking German." So it was kind of a mixed thing.
So when you went back for this anniversary, what were some of the activities that had taken place there?
Well, we saw Point du Hoc. That was the point where, when you went into Le Havre, you had to scale this cliff. It was about 6 or 10, 15 stories high, a cliff, and the Germans had put up their heavy guns to shoot down or to destroy any vehicles coming up and to keep troops from landing. And they had killed hundreds and hundreds of troops trying to get into Europe. They had killed them. And Mike and I got a chance to walk through that to see their gun emplacements. They're still there. The big underground bunkers made out of concrete are still there. And we also got a chance to see the cemetery at Point du Hoc, one of the most beautiful cemeteries you ever saw. And I used to fuss about the federal government maintaining cemeteries all over the world. But once you walk that cemetery, I think we counted maybe more than 2,000. There was more than 2,000 troops buried there. And there was not a one of them that was 22 years old. They were 18, 19, and 20, that young. And here we were going back to see that, and it kind of makes you feel guilty to be alive and well, and knowing that those kids lost their life trying to scale that cliff, trying to protect the people who had been conquered by the Germans. It's kind of tough.
So Mike was your late wife, and
Yes.
we'll talk about her in a minute, but I know that you did many things together. And but right now what I'd like to do is ask you about when you came back. What was that? Did you come back? You came back in 1945.
Yes, I was discharged in November 1945 at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, not too far from Kansas City. Immediately went to Kansas City because everybody wants to go to the big town, and now you can celebrate that the war is over and you're home and you've not lost any limbs or your life. And so we stayed in Kansas City for maybe a month and a half or so that winter. And then I went back home before Christmas. And it was kind of sad because going back home, Mom and Pop were still there, our home was still there, but the opportunities for doing what we wanted were not there. but we had agreed to go back to college, and we applied for the GI Bill. We got the GI Bill, we got the papers, and we were ready to go to college. So we spent the spring just waiting for school to start. It was somewhere in February or March when we got the papers to go to college, and we couldn't go for the second semester, but we enrolled for the fall semester following that. And that summer we did we felt like they owed us some good stuff, good times. You know, you come back from the war, you figure they owe you some good times. So we did very little of anything except socialize, had parties, and drank, and drove up and down the highway like we owned the highways. We did a lot of dumb things. And we were very fortunate because people in small towns, the officials, the officers, don't very much arrest you or give you tickets or put you in jail. They give you a lecture, and then if they go tell your mom and pop, you're in big trouble. So they didn't do that to us. And I was thinking now, if you did that, you'd be in big trouble. You get tickets for $250 here for just speeding, you know. So we didn't have that happen to us. So we were lucky. And once we made that spring semester, that summer we played softball, we played baseball, we did a lot of things. And then we all decided to buckle down, and when August came, we went to college and kept going.
Where did you go to college?
Schools were still segregated. I went to Jefferson City. The black college for Missouri was in Lincoln University, Jefferson City, Missouri. And so we went to college there. Graduated in 1950, 4 years. We did 46 to 50, got out in 45, college 46 to 50. I did a double major, a major in business administration and economics, and a major in teacher education and social studies. And I did that because jobs were hard to come by, and jobs were still open not to blacks in a lot of places. But then we decided to concentrate on getting into the teaching profession, which was a good decision anyway. I tried the business world, but there was not very many opportunities there. And so we got into the teaching profession, and it became the kind of thing that we decided we would do the rest of our lives. But we got the degrees. I got a degree from Lincoln under the GI Bill. I did half of my master's before the GI Bill funds ran out. You got all your expenses paid plus an allowance of about $100 a month for food and whatever. That was great because then we worked the whole 4 years in school. And then I did the rest of my master's on my own, and then I got a chance to get into a doctoral program later on, and once I was in the profession, and then I did that.
And from after college, what did you do? What jobs did you hold?
My first job after college was to go back to Kansas City, and I took all the exams that they had for job openings. Hallmark Cards was big in Kansas City. It was one of the biggest employers, but they only hired blacks to be janitors or that kind of thing. And so that was still disappointing, and we still took all the exams, but you couldn't get into those jobs. But we did have a brother, my oldest brother, who was working for the Kansas City House and Window Cleaning Company in Kansas City, and he'd become a supervisor for them, and he helped hire people. So he told us, go home, put your diplomas from college in the trunk, come back and sign up with us, we'll give you a job. And he got 3 of us jobs working for the Kansas City House and Window Cleaning Company. And he said, if they ask you how much education you have, you put high school only. Don't put anything about going to college because you won't make it with us if you do. And that was kind of true. That's the way it was. So we started out with that. We worked for the Kansas City House and Window Cleaning Company. And then as the time went on, job openings started opening up. They opened up where you get into the school system. They opened up where you get into the police department. But then many years later, they opened up where you could get into any industry as a black, but not all of them. And so in the meantime, I went into the business world for 7 or 8 years, and that didn't work out. And then I switched to the school system and stayed with it, and that was where I found the thing that I really wanted to do.
So you ended up in Nebraska.
Yes, I was in Kansas City, and I went to Kansas City, Missouri public schools. My wife went to the Kansas City, Kansas public schools, and then we went to Denver and went back to the business world and stayed there for a year, and then we were recruited to come back to Nebraska. And we came to Nebraska and then went back into the school system in Nebraska and stayed, and that's where we ended up.
What position did you have in Nebraska?
Well, in Nebraska, the Black Revolution was really heavy then, and schools were still segregated, and then the federal government had accepted the suits from the school district people saying that their schools had been segregated, the black schools had been segregated, and when the people sued the federal government, came down and determined that you're going to have to integrate the schools. And then I was hired as an outside guy who was not a militant to come in and integrate the schools in Nebraska, Omaha. And they'd never had a black high school administrator in Nebraska, and so they did that then because the heat was on. And I knew that that was going to happen because I was not accepted by the community, the black community, because I was an outsider. And I was looked upon as what they called an Oriole, and they thought that I was not militant enough, but I was never militant. Mom and Pop did not raise any militants. They raised you to become a part of the system and work at it. And so I was able to get an opportunity to do this in Nebraska. And we took a school that had had a population of 2,000. It had gone down to 500 black kids, completely segregated. And we turned their program completely around, built a new program, started with these 500 angry blacks, and we ended up with the largest school population in the state, this school that we integrated, and we recruited whites back to it for 3 years. And after about 2.5, 3 years, we had a population of 1,900 kids, 98% white, and it turned out that it was a very successful program.
So recently there was a recognition for you, I understand. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Recently we had the people who had been members of our staff and the students who had graduated had they had an anniversary for the success of the tech program, and they invited all of the people who had students who had graduated and all the teachers who had taught there to come back for this celebration. And Mike and I had met and were a part of the staff in Omaha Technical High School for all those years, and we went back for this. It was just very unusual. They had we thought they'd have 300 or 400 people. They ended up with 200 or 300 the first night when we were going to be having just a staff meeting, and they had so many kids came in, and by the time we had the big anniversary meeting on Saturday night at the auditorium, they had planned to have 800 or 900 people. They ended up with 1,100 people and couldn't accommodate anymore, and so they had to close the doors on 1,100 people, teachers and students who had graduated. It was unbelievable. Very, very warm, and it was one of the nicest things that ever had happened to us was to be a part of that. And Mike was sick with cancer, but she knew that she wanted to go to that, and so we told the doctor we were going anyway, and she went.
And you're happy that you were able to share that wonderful time together with all those incredible people. Yes,
yes, I was. And I'm going back to Nebraska this summer. And when I go back, I will contact all of the people that were the keys to putting that together and let them know that I'm coming back, so that we'll be able to see a number of those again this summer.
Good. Mm-hmm. Well, Brad, I understand you've got family and they're sort of spread out. Tell me about your family.
I have a son and a daughter, and Mike had 3 children, 2 daughters and 1 son. We put those families together, and it's worked out quite well. My My daughter and Mike's children have become like family for me now, and I'm living with Mike's oldest daughter and her two children, her husband and two children. I'm living with them. My daughter and Mike's daughter got together when Mike was sick and decided that I could not live by myself, and so they insisted that I come and live with Julie and Tracy, and that's where I am now. It's been quite an experience, but I've known those kids since they were babies. Mike and I were at the hospital for the birth of every grandkid we had, all of them, all 6 of them. And so they're all a part of the family. We celebrated Christmas in Denver with the kids and the grandkids, and they all flew in together so we could have a great time. So I'm now living with them.
You have a grandson who's a very successful businessman, I understand.
Yes, we have. We have a grandson. We have grandkids who are they're very unusual. They've known all their lives from the time they were little kids together. They used to sit together around the swimming pool at home at our house, and there would be all of them, my grandson and Mike's grandchildren, and they would talk about what they were going to do when they went to college. They were in 6th and 7th grade, but they all knew they had to go to college. They wanted to go to college, and they've been friends, and so they are very much one blended family now. And my grandson was a kid that we didn't know if he would ever be physically okay when he was born or mentally okay. And it turned out that he was had a great physical body, and he was a big brain, and he was on the honor roll, made honor roll all the way through elementary school, all the way through college. Went to college with a scholarship for academics and for football and basketball, and graduated from college, was selected to take a franchise for a unit called the Chocolate Factory and become a manager of it. If he were successful for 2 years, then he would be able to buy that franchise at a discounted price. And he now owns the franchise, has owned it for more than 1.5 years or almost 2 years, and is now negotiating to buy another one back in the Kansas City area. And he will go back to the Kansas City area, and he thinks that he would like to go back into the inner city from whence he came. And he worked there as a college student. They chose these kids because of their academic ability in college to take these franchises. And now in June or July this year, the owner of the whole franchise takes his top 4 or 5 kids from across the country and takes them on a vacation somewhere, like they'll go to Peru or somewhere this summer. And Isaac would be one of those. And he, because he's been one of the most successful owners that the guy's ever had, so he'll be doing that this summer. So it's very gratifying to know that.
So the legacy of your parents and education continues with all your grandchildren.
Yes, every one of them. The 2 youngest ones at home now. The other one is a 17-year-old. She's planning where she'll go to college. It's not when, it's where she will go. And the other one's deciding where she will go to college. She's 13, and so that's the way it's always been in our family. And Mom and Pop started that by telling us, you have to get an education. You have to get an education.
So looking back at the service, your service to your country, how did the wartime affect your life?
My becoming a member of the military, and even though it was a segregated military, it had 2 distinct advantages. Number one, blacks were not in the front lines where they were killed in battle. And that is a terrible thing to say, but they weren't, and they weren't. When we went back to Point du Hoc, we got a chance to see that, and we saw all of those kids that had scaled that cliff and all of those that had died, and they were not black, because that's the way the world was. But now that we're back and out and we're looking back at it, we're seeing that the GI Bill of Rights made common people who had not the wherewithal to go to college, gave them the ability to go to college and move themselves up into the middle class. And it boosted the middle class by embracing all of these veterans into that middle class and giving them a chance to become contributors rather than users of the system. And I think that was one of the greatest things that the military did. It also taught me how to get along with people of all races, all religious groups. It didn't make any difference. It taught me all of that, and I believed in that. I would do anything to see that our military continues to be a strong military in the world that now is so dangerous that you don't know who's going to do what to you anymore. So I believe in the military. I would support it forever. I have a grandson, Logan, my first and famous grandchildren that live with us. Logan is in the Navy, and he is in the explosive ordnance devices, one of the units that supports the SEALs, and he loves it. He says, my job is to find a way to give back to my country. And Logan had one of the toughest times growing up as a kid, a poor kid that you ever want to see, but he believes that his job now is to give back.
Is there any message that you would like to leave for your children and grandchildren and future generations?
Yes. Number one, judge people by what they do and what they are, and not what some label would cause you to believe. My grandchildren don't know anything about racial hatred or any of that. They don't know anything about it. They are now seeking to understand, why would that be happening because you're black? And so they're looking at that now, and so they don't know anything about that. I want them to keep doing that. I want them to keep finding ways to get as much education as you can, and then keep finding ways to contribute to your society, to your community, to your state, to your country. And I hope that they will all continue to be that.
Is there anything else you would like to add before we end this interview?
When Mike and I came from Omaha to Tucson, Arizona, we had the opportunity to become members of the American Red Cross after Katrina. And when Katrina hit, it destroyed New Orleans, which was our second home. We loved New Orleans. And we went to the Red Cross office to see if we could become volunteers. It took us 6 or 8 hours that day to just get in the door to talk to them about volunteering. And we became full-time volunteers for the American Red Cross 9 years ago. And it was the greatest thing that we could have done in order to find a way to give back to your society. And so I love the American Red Cross. I've met some of the greatest people that I've ever wanted to meet in the American Red Cross, and I still think that they are very unusual people. They are just giving people. I know people here that work full-time. They're just great people, and I love them.
Brad, thank you for sharing your life's experiences with us today. We love you too.
Thank you, and I love you. Thank you very much for this opportunity.